it's really like been quite a journey for me as well, in terms of sort of first being introduced to the concept and then kind of going through different phases in different environments, with different people using the concept. And I think one of the key things that that I've kind of observed is just really the sort of depth of the tool, and the impact of using the tool with individuals, or whether that be with teams, is often different. I've probably delivered now over that period of time, hundreds of feedback sessions actually, and then extended using the mental toughness concept within sort of a team environment as well as the individual work. I think that's the power that the tool brings, is that it really enables people to make sense of something that they can then sort of go away and get really sort of focused about actually now what do they need to do, or what do they choose to do to sort of apply the way that they think, because I think that's really what it comes down to. It's about how people think. So the power is really around the questioning and how you use the tool, and really how you sort of connect the different interplays between the different factors, using it as a way to kind of invite really powerful questions during the session, to raise sort of awareness and help people to get a bit more clarity over how a particular aspect might be impacting them, particularly in the workplace. And then you can really challenge some assumptions, particularly around limiting beliefs. During COVID, obviously, with the kind of aviation kind of global business almost at a standstill for a few months, and it was such a significant impact for the business, we particularly took the decision to integrate it and continue with our learning and development programs, particularly around, we have a program called Grow with Etihad. And that program, we had to very quickly sort of, transfer everything onto a virtual platform, because at that time people weren't meeting at the office. And we also did a lot of initiatives around, trying to engage people into learning, because we had a lot of staff that were grounded at that time. So we took the decision to continue with our leadership development programs, and those were all delivered virtually.
My philosophy is that I am only as good as my team. I have so much respect for people that give you honest feedback and have the courage to do it. But also, it actually is more important that people understand why they're changing, and it doesn't matter if it takes longer. Yeah. And so I've changed so much over the past decade. And for me, it's about openly sharing, and I suppose more of a professional mentoring type relationship around developing capability and bringing your experience as a director to the table. For me, that's leadership. It's the courage to have challenging conversations. People have got the skills to do their job. For me, it's always, it might be a confidence issue. It might be perceived conflict. Everyone's got their strengths. And for me, I always focus on the strengths. I think we've all got our weaknesses, and I've actually reached the conclusion that they'll always be there. So you get more value out of focusing on the strengths of people rather than trying to fix the areas for development.
I think the examples you give really sort of suggest that actually the mental toughness development is actually sometimes about separating from your ego and doing what you believe to be the right thing.
About 2015, I did my yoga teacher training. I straight away had this narrative. This is the devil on my shoulder telling me, you're too old, you're not fit enough, you're not going to be good at this. And within 4 days, I was doing headstands and handstands. It's naive to think you can get to a senior role and not have an ego. We've all got egos. And my identity was attached to a job title and a company that I worked for. And the decision to leave that role was challenging. And there's people that think I left my corporate career too early. There's other people that think I should have gone on and done CIO roles at other organisations. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's knowing what you love doing and how you want to spend your time. And I made the call that I didn't want to do that anymore. And I now have designed my life And it was a hard call to make. But every single day, I'm so appreciative of the decisions that I've made. And I don't let my job consume my life anymore.
The first time where I was like, where does the system not serve people? So these kind of young people were being put into these boxes of like, you're just not doing what you're supposed to do. But having met them and met their families, I was thinking, I just think the system's messed up. Like, I don't think it's these kids. I think there's something that the system needs to adjust and change in order to cater for what those young people were going through. So they were having to make choices as to whether they would go to school and invest in their education or whether they would care for their ailing parents. And I just thought that the mandatory attendance and getting these kids into school just was not fit for their circumstances. And we came up with something called the halfway house, and we just made a new system for them. We will create an education system that allows the school to get their tick box. So literally, I would kind of pick them up, let them step into the school, give them their tick around education, and then we created a whole learning package that was essentially what we would have done during COVID. It was just done remotely. We just adapted it to their circumstances. I like to think of leadership as not knowing the answers, but knowing who you can trust to find the answers, or creating the space for people to do that. And that's particularly relevant where innovation is a feature of the work. We often talk about diversity, don't we? And how important it is to have diverse teams. But I find myself more often talking about it's diversity of thought. You know, it's not just about where you come from, but it's how you think and how you approach things and how you present things. When I think about some of those ingredients, you know, there's something around the vulnerability to say, I know something, I don't know something. I think it's harder to say I don't know something. What an act of bravery to stand up and not know the answers in front of somebody. And then create an invitation for other smart people to find the answers. That wasn't where I was coming from, so there was definitely a different definition. But when I listened through their experiences, what I found is when I used the word resilience, it was weaponized, and it was, you don't think we're strong enough, you don't think we're good enough, you know, there was something about it came from a position of lacking, which I must say absolutely broke my heart. It's just so unfair. And again, it's why I love OD, because often it's the system conditions, not the people. The people will act in their best way within a system. But that was the sort of experience of this group of colleagues. I was thinking we have to create a sort of a common language. So you can't have a conversation where you use words that have so many different meanings without a common grounding, because then how can we have a conversation if the words have so many different variations and meanings? Some of our resilience it's both internal and external, you know, and there's some really beautiful tempering that happens when you're forged in fire, and there's some wonderful scarring that happens that really makes you a bit stronger, but also makes you a bit fragile. And I love the idea of thinking about fragility and the different metaphors when we talk about an egg versus a boiled egg, and when you're flexible versus when you just break. The balance of sort of your personality, your inherent things that are about you, but also how that interplays with you're part of a world. You're not an isolated island. I think it's probably better to start with children, because if you can start that level of self-awareness when they're young, like imagine like what the leaders of the world will be like if we could start them being self-aware from the age of 11.
Why the book? I think from my interactions with myself and others, Doug, especially over the course of career that covered about 30 years, I found that most people have similar problems. We are not as unique as we like to think. I found that the issues that I struggled with, which are mostly behavioral, people management and self-management issues, were being faced by others. I was training for the marathon, and I was asking this school teacher, a Canadian lady who was running with me, and I was asking her about special performance and my struggle to find a framework to explain or to boost or diagnose that extra performance, that extra juice that people need in careers and sports. And she said, why don't you Google mental toughness? If I look back and think, I think one major issue that sort of stands out is confidence or lack of confidence. it really holds people back from what they could do. And you see it among women, you see it in minorities, you see it in, and no, without sounding racist, you see it, for example, mostly in Asian, with Asian population, South Asia, India, for example, Pakistan. I remember speaking at to a big bunch of chartered accountants last year in Bahrain, and I put up this phrase. It's in Hindi. It's called "Log kya kahenge," which means, translation in English is "What will people think?" And I said, "Why does this happen to most of you?" And they all said one word. They all shouted one word: fear. Fear of being judged, fear of failure, fear of looking bad. I mean, it's just, and that probably is in some ways inextricably linked with confidence.
People almost have this idea of where my place is in the world. And you see it whether it's societal, cultural, linked to socioeconomic status, whatever it might be, but that sense of, well, that's my place in the world. Sure, what would I be doing trying to go and do X, Y, and Z? That's for other people. And it sounds quite similar there to what you described. And it's that, I think it's really nice to explain that asymmetric relationship between the shame of failure is much greater than the pride associated with the success. And that's what kind of puts people into that.
I think people are complex. And the relationship between, it's not linear relationship, right? You don't get instant responses from people, instant performance from people. People need to be coached, they need to be motivated, they need to be supervised. And companies sometimes don't just have the time or the inclination to do that because they're so focused on the short-term financial results. Incentives drive behaviors, as we all know. And the biggest incentives that we have in a listed company, for example, is stock price and profits, and they are strongly related. Now, on the flip side, someone was saying that that's true, but for the long-term financial health of the company, you still need to focus on people. So why are not people thinking about that? That's my hypothesis about what's happening in the workplace these days. Despite all the talk about, ESG and diversity and inclusion, equality, in some cases real, in some cases just superfluous stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, like Milton Friedman said, I mean, companies have only one purpose, and that is to make profits. I was just talking to somebody today, and he was talking about having 6 bosses to work with. Yeah. People want everything today. They don't want to wait for next year.
I think there's a danger within coaching and positive psychology and well-being movements that if we don't kind of take a critical eye on the organizational and the systemic structures, I think that's why programs fail so often.
True.
So yeah, I do think it's a good observation, and what I'd say, Binod, it's a real.
Yeah. So I was having a chat with a senior manager a year ago, and I asked him a very simple question: why is it that most or many people at senior or middle level are not self-aware? And his answer was immediate, and it made perfect sense. He said, Binod, that's because they are preoccupied, and in some cases obsessed with the outside world. They have no time to reflect.
Because one of the things we know about anxiety is we all have it, first of all, to varying degrees. And we should. It's helpful. It's an adaptive function. If we don't have anxiety, we're not going to live long as a species. We need to have some degree of anxiety to keep ourselves, safe. But I was seeing a lot of people who had so much anxiety they would avoid. And we know that the cure for anxiety is avoidance. It's not good. It's not good to, and it's not healthy, but it does work. Confronting those areas of anxiety face on and looking at them as a challenge as opposed to sort of this crushing anxiety invoking situation really makes a significant difference in terms of how people grow. Knowing that mental toughness exists and it's a real thing, what is it that gives some people more of it than others, if you will, for lack of a better phrase? My experience has been, perhaps it's because I work primarily with young adults and adolescents, is the nature of the environment in which risk must be taken. But I think a lot of people internalize quote unquote failure as a judgment on character. And if we feel that way, we're far less likely to take a risk. But the emotional implications of being gifted are extreme. They feel that unless they're performing at an almost perfect level, they're going to be judged. And unfortunately, many times they're right. They are. And one of the phrases I hear very often with gifted students who are, underperforming is that, well, they're not meeting their potential. That is such a dangerous phrase. We want to keep striving, we want to keep, pushing ourselves, but at the same time, like to tell a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old, you're not quite meeting your potential, I think is insidious in terms of the effect that it can have on the well-being of that student and their ability to take a risk. We have this mythology that, and this goes back to the judgment stuff, we have this mythology that you can be anything you want to be. And if you just try hard enough, you can do it.
Yeah.
That's not true. It's absolutely not true. And it's a fundamental lie that we tell our children sometimes, that, if you just work hard enough. Well, I can tell you as a, male of a certain age and a male who's like 5'6" on a good day, I'm not going to be a basketball player. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Our priority now is application. How do we put it into the hands of people who can make a difference with it? And that is quite a challenge because, as you say, people suffer from initiative overload.
Our relationship developed was using the MTQ test for universities to say, look, run this with students. It will show you those who, have resilience issues. And the great thing about resilience, as we all know, is that you can impact it. So by running suitable interventions, you're going to be able to strengthen the resilience of the student. And that is good for employability. That is good for keeping the students on campus, etc. We've been working with MTQ for a number of years, and we've had some pretty, spectacular results with problem cohorts of students. And we were managed to, through using MTQ, cut their retention by, or cut their drop-off rate by 50%. We're developing at the moment a service for the universities that we work with around global student success.
Organisations tend to send or do things to their staff, tell them to go on the resilience programme, but then don't do anything themselves. So I guess my question to you is, are you finding that you're able to go back to universities and say, look, if you restructured the way you worked, you would actually minimise some of the problems as well?
What we're trying to do initially is to really audit the good practice that they've got already. And the second job is to put in the interventions, or get them to put in the interventions that will be needed to support the students in terms of, tests or mental well-being, or, for international students, ongoing access to English language support. The danger is if the institution or the company that's using it isn't then equipped or able to do something with that information, then there's limited point in running the test. And so our job.
But we were looking at the impact that mental toughness had on retention, and I think it was something like just over 15% of retention could be explained purely by mental toughness.
It's difficult to put them all in one basket, which is what, we try not to do that. But what we try and say is that there are commonalities that you can, that do affect all the students, or could affect all the students. Mental toughness being one, but, mental health and well-being at a more general level, going back, to those English language skills, well, that isn't going to affect an American student, but it might well affect a student coming from India, and you need to give them the confidence. I think a lot of it is down to, there's the practicalities. Students from widening participation institutions tend to have less money. They tend to come from, poorer socioeconomic backgrounds, which means that they're more likely to be in work. they're more likely to be a little bit older. They may have family caring responsibilities, whether that's for children or for parents or what have you. But if you can give them the chance to, on their business course, to be working with a group of students in Kazakhstan or Mexico or wherever it is, you're broadening their horizons. You're giving them more confidence that actually, you know what, most people around the world are pretty much the same. I think the benefits of going abroad are undoubted and huge, but I think it's, it isn't a level playing field, because there are certain students who are just better prepared through, just through their life that they've had until now.
I think that's so interesting, Charles, particularly as a working class kid from Grimsby, the first in the family to go to uni. Like, I hadn't even been on an aeroplane. Yeah. I finished my master's degree before I ever went on a plane. I would have probably walked past all the posters and banners for things, because you just, I don't know, I suppose you just think they're for other people. You don't really think.
Post-pandemic, work has changed beyond recognition. I mean, before the pandemic, I travelled at least a week a month abroad. I was away. I've been away twice since the end of the pandemic, because I can do everything on Zoom. This isn't a new way of doing business, or it's a very important part of doing business. And so if you can get students used to interacting on Teams or Zoom and using online collaboration tools, that's a huge employability skill that you're giving them as well.
I first came across the COIL program, I think it was during COVID. So COIL's collaborative online international learning, isn't it? So
we have to start thinking about the climate crisis. We have to start thinking about these areas that are uncomfortable for universities because their current model is reliant on international students pitching up on campus. But we need to start thinking about how we can use technology to minimize travel. We advocate that universities should have, as it were, academic tutoring and student support tutoring separate. So there should be people who are trained and understand things like mental toughness, because if they don't, and they don't understand it and they don't buy into it, then how are they going to support their students?
I think it goes back to that old adage, know your why. Why do I want to do this? And it was like, I don't want to go backwards, I want to go forwards. And it was the drive to have a green beret. I remember my own coach saying to me, what do you do to reflect? And I just go, well, catch myself in the mirror in the morning while having a shave. That's about it. You don't have time to slow down and do the reflection sort of piece. You just make the magic happen. But that's, as we know, is a load of nonsense. There are moments where you do stop and reflect. Because I think going backwards, people look at it as a stigma that, oh, you're backslash, you didn't get through Royal Marine recruit training first time. Well, interestingly enough, the vast majority of people that apply for recruit training either don't get through or don't get through first time because of the high demands physically and mentally on people. So actually going backwards gives you an opportunity to learn. If you believe in yourself, you can really change your own life opportunities. The Teaching Leaders program was all about raising the leadership within the school system. And if you raise the leadership within the school system, kids get a better life chance as a result of it. Because we were able to track those interventions that had the greatest impact. The biggest one was the development of self-awareness. And if you think about that sort of concept of learning orientation, I still think learning orientation is the beating art of the 4C model, to find the time for their own development. And they always say, but who do you put first? Well, it's my family, my friends, my team, our business. And the reality of it is that you've got to start putting yourself first. If you don't put yourself first, how can you ever give your best for other people? It's almost an impossible task to create an environment where other people can thrive if you're not thriving yourself. Being brilliant at the basics for me is purpose, identity, values, beliefs, behaviors, and focusing on what got you here, what will get you where you're going next, and really focusing on that sort of who you are is how you lead, who you are is how you perform, who you are is how you coach.
And previously, both through my work and sort of again through my circumstance, I was kind of aware of this concept of post-traumatic growth, as in, so the ability to look back and think, well, I'm actually better in some way than what I was before I went through whatever the trauma was. And I think a lot of us maybe can reflect on the pandemic and think, well, there is elements of me now that I'm more aware of and more comfortable with than I was beforehand.
How do you see our mental toughness framework connecting with sort of post-traumatic growth?
Often it's easiest for most easiest as humans to understand things within a framework, isn't it? And this was a nice little framework for me to reflect on some of the things I'd been through. What you sort of learn after you've been through a few tough sessions, let's use a sporting context, is you realise that there's always a tougher one coming. You don't have that visibility over events in your life, do you, really? And you rarely do you sit in the middle of them and go, I'm going to get through this. It's almost the understanding that you can grow as a result of what you're going through allows you to almost, I'm not going to say enjoy, but certainly be a lot more controlled in that moment, whatever that is. I'd also been through some personal trauma, like we'd lost a couple of children to preterm birth. And so it was a huge development of my own sense of identity away from being a rugby player. And so from all of that became this sense of, well, what have I got to lose?
So I'll often say, well, when your strength and conditioning coach does a session with you expect to come out of it feeling a little bit sore. You've been pushed a little bit outside of your comfort zone. You're not going to be bruised. You're not going to be, laid up for days. And again, that would be a similar sort of analogy that I regularly kind of use from a mental point of view. That's what we need to try and do to people as well. We should be pushing you slightly outside your comfort zone. Your confidence there is drawn on my belief on what can happen in the future and how I can control that. And I think that's sort of a really kind of powerful mechanism there for being able to adopt that really positive mindset going forward.
So when I hit that bus and I'm on the way to the ground, I am done in terms of performance, and I still have the ability to control what's going on. I've done all that I can do, and it's still an opportunity for me to perform today.
You're describing the kind of experiences and lives that managers and leaders in business experience. It's full of ups and downs and stuff like that. Despite the fact there's not enough attention to it, there is still evidence of an approach to dealing with trauma and setback. And you don't see enough of it in business. People will either try and sweep an adverse event under the carpet, they won't necessarily deal with it.
Largely, most of it can be in your control as well. In terms of reflecting, you should probably reflect on what your role was in whatever happened. Certainly the most high-performing teams I have is really fascinating understanding of, you need to do that. You and your role is to do that so I can do this. And I don't think that happens in the business world that well.
No.
Whereas you try and control almost too much rather than letting someone make mistakes, learn from mistakes, become better in that zone.
Because the framework is really valuable. The questionnaire is very valuable, but it's self-awareness because it's an enabler. Nobody actually wants to go out and be more mentally tough. What you want to do is be more effective and enjoy better well-being.
Some's higher than other, and we're all eventually going to die. So it's going to be nasty at some stage. And what I don't think we often apply is, one, generally I think that most of them you'll be okay. Most of them you'll get through. And it's bloody hard to see that when you're in the midst of it.
Dean and his wife setting up a charity which is called Born HRMI. And that's what we would like to explore today.
Yeah, if people ask us how many kids we've got, we say 2, because we've got 2 boys, and it's night time here in Australia, and they're hopefully sleeping upstairs. But really, we've got 6 children, 4 of whom were born too early, and 4 of whom didn't survive. But it was an incredibly traumatic period for us in our life. In pretty much all developed countries in the world, that this rate of preterm birth is increasing. The cost of a child in NICU, but also more importantly, it is the leading cause of death and disability in children under 5. And so the cost of rehabbing and caring for a child with a severe disability until 18 is very, very high. So in the last 50 years, there's been no new treatments for stopping labour. We choose research because we think, the greatest advances that can happen from thinking about why something happens. But I think the way we kept going, and my wife is incredibly tough, but no one ever said no, No one said you can't do it. There's no reason why you can't have children. So in the absence of no, it kind of has to be a yes. No one's saying we can't have children. Yes, it's going to be difficult. But yes, we want a family. So what do? You keep going. And I suppose that's why we've got 2 boys upstairs, I suppose. And it was bloody hard. But you got to walk that track.